A grizzly bear trapped, its massive body tangled in barbed wire, its strength fading with every passing second. No one knew how long it had been suffering, how long it had been alone in agony. Most people would have turned away, too afraid to help. But one man stepped forward. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Stay with us until the end, because this is a story of courage, trust, and an unforgettable bond that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. As Daniel Carter drove his old pickup truck along the dirt road leading into the Montana wilderness. A retired park ranger, Daniel had spent most of his life in these mountains, understanding their rhythm, respecting their secrets. But that morning, something felt off. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling of leaves, were replaced by something else. A low, guttural noise, a sound of pain. Daniel slowed the truck, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel as he scanned the trees. Then he saw it. A few feet off the road, tangled in a stretch of rusted barbed wire, was a massive grizzly bear. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The bear's thick brown fur was matted with blood. The wire had wrapped around its front leg and part of its chest, cutting deep into the flesh. Every time the bear moved, the barbs dug deeper. It was exhausted, its breathing ragged. For a moment, they locked eyes. Pain, fear, and something else, something Daniel had never seen in a wild bear before. Desperation. Most animals in pain would lash out, would fight until their last breath. But this bear, it wasn't fighting anymore. It was pleading. Daniel exhaled sharply, his pulse hammering. Every instinct screamed at him to stay in the truck. This was a 1-200B predator. If it panicked, if it lunged at him, there would be nothing he could do. But as he looked into the bear's eyes again, he knew it was dying, and if he drove away, it would die alone in agony. Daniel made his choice. Slowly, carefully, he reached into the back of his truck and pulled out a pair of wire cutters. His boots crunched against the dirt as he stepped toward the wounded giant. The bear let out a deep, shuddering breath. It didn't growl. It didn't try to escape. It just watched him. Daniel took one more step, and then, inch by inch, he knelt beside the bear, closer than he had ever been to something this powerful, this deadly. He lifted the wire cutters and began to set the bear free. Daniel's hands were steady, but his heart pounded as he positioned the wire cutters over the first strand of barbed wire. The metal was rusted and twisted tightly, the barbs cutting deep into the bear's thick fur, disappearing into raw, exposed wounds. He swallowed hard. This was going to hurt. The grizzly's massive chest rose and fell in slow, labored breaths. Its ears flicked, its golden brown eyes locked onto Daniel, not with rage, not with panic, but with something unsettlingly human. It was waiting. Daniel knew he had seconds before the bear's instinct kicked in, before the pain forced it to react. He had seen animals lash out blindly when trapped. He had scars to prove it, but there was no time to hesitate. With a sharp snip, the first wire snapped. The bear flinched. A deep, rumbling growl rolled from its throat, not of aggression, but of pure, unfiltered pain. Daniel froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the bear relaxed again. Daniel exhaled the breath he didn't realize he was holding. "You're letting me do this?" he muttered under his breath. It was insanity. And yet, as he moved to the next wire, the bear did something that shook him to his core. It lowered its head. Not in exhaustion, not in surrender, in trust. Daniel's hands trembled as he worked, carefully cutting each piece of barbed wire wrapped around the bear's leg and chest. Every snap of metal sent a shudder through the animal's enormous frame. But it didn't attack. It didn't even try to pull away. The sun hung low in the sky by the time he reached the final wire, the deepest cut wrapped tight around the bear's foreleg. Daniel hesitated. This was the worst one, the one that had nearly severed flesh from bone. His gut twisted. The second he cut it, the pain might send the bear into a blind frenzy, and Daniel was within striking distance, but there was no turning back. With one final motion, he gripped the cutters, positioned them over the wire, and snapped. The wire whipped away. springing loose from the wound. The grizzly roared, a deafening, guttural sound that shook Daniel's bones. It reared its massive head, muscles rippling, and Daniel threw himself backward, his instincts screaming that this was it. He had made a mistake. The bear rose slightly onto its injured leg. Its giant frame wobbled. Then, with a deep, exhausted huff, it collapsed onto its side. It didn't run. It didn't attack. It didn't even snarl. It just breathed. Daniel stared, his chest heaving, his entire body drenched in sweat. The grizzly was free, but it wasn't leaving. Daniel's throat felt tight. He had expected one of two things. The bear would attack him the moment it was freed. The bear would run into the forest without looking back. But the bear just lay there, bleeding, shaking, alive. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't see a wild beast in front of him. He saw a soul, a broken, battered soul, grateful to be alive. And in that moment he realized this wasn't over yet. The forest was silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves. Just the sound of labored breathing from both Daniel and the grizzly bear that lay sprawled on the ground. Free from the barbed wire, but still dangerously weak and wounded, Daniel wiped his sweaty palms against his jeans, his mind racing. What now? The logical thing to do was walk away. The bear was no longer trapped. It would either heal on its own or it wouldn't. That was how nature worked, but logic meant nothing when he looked at what was in front of him. A massive predator, yes, but also a living, suffering creature, barely clinging to life. Daniel knew how to read animals. He had spent years tracking, observing, learning their habits, and he knew without a doubt that this bear wasn't going anywhere. Not in this condition, not alone. He let out a slow breath, rubbing the tension from his temples. "Damn it," he muttered. His truck was parked nearby. He had a first aid kit, some bottles of water, and an old tarp he used for emergencies. But how do you help a 1-200B bear? Carefully. Daniel moved slowly back to his truck, keeping his movements deliberate, non-threatening. He grabbed the tarp and the water, then walked back, pausing every few feet to see if the bear would react. Nothing. The massive creature barely even lifted its head. It was exhausted. When Daniel knelt down just inches from its face, the bear's nostrils flared slightly, catching his scent. For a moment, Daniel's heart pounded. One wrong move, one bad reaction, and he was dead. But the bear didn't move. It just watched him. Daniel unscrewed the bottle cap and slowly tipped it, letting small drips of water spill onto the dirt near the bear's mouth. Nothing happened. Then a flicker of movement. The bear's massive tongue slid out, lapping weakly at the moisture. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. This was a wild animal, a creature built to survive alone, to fear humans, to fight when cornered. And yet, here it was, accepting help. Daniel poured more water onto the tarp, creating a small puddle. This time, the bear moved slightly, shifting its weight just enough to lap up every drop. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was going to live. If it got food, if it rested, if it didn't bleed out first. Daniel clenched his jaw. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave it here, not like this. But the thought of bringing a wounded grizzly bear anywhere near civilization was insanity. Wildlife authorities would tranquilize it, move it to an area where it might not survive, or worse, they'd put it down because a bear that had been injured and forced into human contact was considered a risk. Daniel looked at the bear again, the scars, the deep cuts from the wire, the slow rise and fall of its chest. It wasn't a risk, it was just alive, and it was his fault. If he had ignored the sound, if he had kept driving, this bear would be dead already. Now it was his responsibility. He ran a hand through his graying hair and let out a rough, exhausted laugh. "Well, buddy," he muttered, "guess I just made the dumbest decision of my life." The bear didn't react, didn't growl, didn't move. It just breathed. Daniel stood, hands on his hips, looking down at the massive creature whose life now depended on him. And for the first time, he felt it. This wasn't just about survival. This was about trust. And that was something neither of them had ever expected. The forest was turning dark. The last traces of golden light faded behind the towering trees, casting long shadows over the clearing where Daniel stood, his pulse still racing, his body tense. The grizzly bear was still alive, But that meant nothing if it didn't get help soon, Daniel paced, rubbing the back of his neck. Every logical thought in his head told him to walk away, let nature take its course. But his gut, his heart, told him otherwise. He looked at the bear again. The beast lay still, its breath coming in slow, uneven puffs. The wounds along its chest and leg were still bleeding, though not as badly as before. Daniel had seen too many animals die in pain, not this one, not after everything. But he had a problem. The bear was too weak to move, and there was no way in hell Daniel could carry 200 pounds of injured muscle and fur to safety. He needed a plan. Daniel exhaled sharply, then turned back toward his truck. He shuffled through the back until he found a thick rope and an old tarp, the same one he had used for makeshift shelters during his ranger days. His mind worked fast. If he could get the bear onto the tarp, maybe, just maybe, he could pull it toward the truck. It was insane, suicidal even, but it was the only option. He grabbed the tarp and slowly approached the bear again. It lifted its head slightly, watching him with clouded, exhausted eyes. Daniel knelt beside it, moving with deliberate care. He unfolded the tarp and began sliding it under the bear's body inch by inch. The bear winced as the fabric touched its wounds, letting out a deep, pained huff. Daniel froze, his entire body tensed. If the bear reacted violently now, there would be nothing he could do. But then the grizzly relaxed again. Daniel swallowed hard. It was letting him do this. His chest tightened as he worked, his hands moving as quickly as he dared. He adjusted the tarp, ensuring it covered most of the bear's underside, then reached for the rope. As carefully as possible, he looped the rope around the edges of the tarp and secured it into a makeshift harness. Then, bracing himself, praying this wasn't the worst decision of his life, he grabbed the rope and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, digging his boots into the dirt, using all the strength his body had left. Still nothing. Daniel gritted his teeth. His muscles burned. His breath came ragged. He couldn't do this alone. He looked back at the bear, its massive chest rising and falling, its eyes still locked onto him. Daniel's stomach twisted. If he left it here, it wouldn't survive the night. The cold, the injuries, predators. A bear, this week, was an easy target for mountain lions or scavengers. He let go of the rope, kneeling beside the animal again, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he spoke. "Look, big guy," he murmured. "I'm trying to help you, but I can't do it alone." The bear's ears twitched slightly. Daniel let out a slow, shaky breath. "You have to try," he whispered. "I know you're in pain. I know you're tired, but if you don't move now, you won't get another chance." It was insane talking to a wild animal like this. But then something unbelievable happened. The bear moved. Not much, just a shift, a slow, agonizing attempt to push itself onto the tarp. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was listening. It understood. With a weak grunt, the bear used what little strength it had left to drag its front paws onto the tarp. Its wounded leg trembled, its jaw tightening in pain. Daniel didn't waste a second. He grabbed the rope again and pulled with everything he had. The tarp slid an inch, then another, and another. The bear groaned, but didn't resist. Daniel felt his muscles strain, his back scream in protest. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long. But then a sound in the distance, a low, rumbling growl. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned his head sharply toward the trees. There, just beyond the shadows, something moved. A pair of glowing eyes, watching, waiting. Daniel's heart pounded. They weren't alone, and whatever was out there had been following them all along. The forest was no longer silent. Daniel could hear it. Low, guttural breathing just beyond the treeing, a sound that sent a sharp chill up his spine. He wasn't alone, and neither was the bear. His fingers instinctively tightened around the rope, his exhausted muscles now rigid with fear. Another growl. Deeper this time. Daniel's pulse thundered. Mountain lion, pack of coyotes. Either way, a wounded bear was a prime target. He turned his gaze back to the grizzly, still sprawled across the tarp. Its nostrils flared as it lifted its head slightly, scanning the darkness. It knew it could smell them. Daniel swallowed hard. He had no gun, no weapon, nothing except the fading light and his own sheer will. Move now! Gritting his teeth, he grabbed the rope and pulled. Pain exploded in his back, but he ignored it. The tarp slid another few inches, dragging the massive bear closer to the road where his truck waited. The growl grew louder. Then movement. Daniel caught a glimpse of a sleek, low shape weaving through the trees. Golden eyes flickered in the dim light, and his stomach dropped. Cougar, a big one, and it was stalking them. Daniel's breath came fast and shallow. The mountain lion wouldn't normally go after a full-grown grizzly. But this wasn't a normal bear. This was a bleeding, half-paralyzed, defenseless meal. The cougar knew it, and so did Daniel. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling harder. The bear let out a deep, warning huff, trying to lift itself, but its wounded leg buckled, forcing it back down. Daniel clenched his jaw. It couldn't fight, not like this, which meant he had to. But how? His truck was still too far. The tarp was barely moving, and the cougar was getting closer. Then a snap of a twig. Daniel's eyes flicked to the right. Another one. A second set of glowing eyes. His stomach twisted. There were two of them. This wasn't just an opportunistic predator. This was a hunt. Daniel's mind raced. He needed a distraction, something, anything to buy time. His flare gun, it was in the truck, useless there. But he looked at his pocket keck knife, his only option, his only chance. The cougar lunged. Daniel didn't think. He shouted loud, primal, furious, and as the beast sprang from the shadows, he swung. The knife slashed through fur. The cougar let out a piercing snarl, landing just feet from Daniel, now circling him. Its companion stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. Daniel's chest heaved. His hands shook around the knife handle. But then a sound more powerful than any weapon, a deep, earth-shattering roar, not from the cougars, from the bear. Daniel turned in shock. The grizzly, the same bear that had been too weak to stand, had somehow lifted itself onto three legs. Its massive frame towered over him, over everything. Its mouth pulled back in a furious snarl, revealing razor-sharp fangs. For the first time that night, the cougars hesitated. The grizzly stepped forward. It was weak, bleeding, barely able to hold its own weight. But that didn't matter because in that moment it wasn't prey anymore. It was a bear, a force of nature, and the cougars knew it. With one last lingering glance, the first slipped back into the trees. The second followed seconds later. Daniel exhaled, his entire body trembling. It was over. The grizzly let out a final huff, then collapsed back onto the tarp, exhausted, drained. Daniel let out a shaky laugh. You just saved my ass," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. The bear didn't react, it just breathed. Daniel shook his head. This animal had no reason to protect him, no reason to trust him, and yet it did. And now, more than ever, Daniel knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just saving this bear was saving him, too. The air was thick with tension, but the danger had passed. The cougars were gone, swallowed by the darkness of the trees. But Daniel's heart was still pounding. His body still braced for a fight that somehow he had survived. And he wasn't alone. The grizzly bear, battered, bleeding, barely able to stand, had fought back, not for itself. For him, Daniel let out a slow breath, his hands still trembling as he dropped the knife. The realization hit him like a freight train. This animal should have left him to die, but instead it had stood up even in its weakest moment to protect him. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust. Daniel turned to the bear, still collapsed on the tarp. Its massive chest rose and fell in labored breaths, its body trembling from exertion. It needed help now. Daniel clenched his jaw and grabbed the rope again. His entire body screamed in protest, his muscles raw and burning. But he couldn't stop. He pulled, inch by inch, foot by foot. The truck was so close now, just a few more feet, and he could figure out how the hell he was going to lift a pawn 200-pound bear into the bed. But then the worst happened. The tarp ripped. Daniel lost his grip, stumbling back onto the dirt as the bear slid sideways, letting out a weak, pained groan. "No! No! No!" Daniel muttered, scrambling forward. The bear's eyes fluttered, its body going limp. Daniel's stomach dropped. He pressed a hand against its side. The bear was still breathing, barely. Daniel felt panic rise in his chest. It wasn't going to make it, not unless he did something now. His eyes darted to his truck, to the winch cable. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot. Daniel scrambled up, running to the truck and uncoiling the steel cable from the front bumper. His hands were slick with sweat, shaking with urgency as he yanked the line toward the bear. If he could just hook it around the tarp, drag the bear into the truck. His fingers fumbled, wrapping the cable around the fabric. He locked the clasp. Then, with a deep breath, he hit the winch switch. The motor winded, the steel line pulling slowly, painfully. The tarp shifted. The bear moved. Daniel held his breath. Come on, come on. The Grizzly's massive body inched upward, scraping against the bed of the truck. Daniel's chest tightened. If the winch failed now, but it didn't. With one final pull, the bear rolled onto the truck bed. Daniel's knees buckled. It was in. He had done it. For the first time in hours, he let himself breathe. But he wasn't done yet. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing down at the motionless bear. It was alive. But for how much longer? He climbed into the truck, slammed the door shut, and gunned the engine. Time was running out, and now it was a race against death. The truck roared down the dirt road, kicking up dust and gravel as Daniel gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. His heart pounded. His breath was shaky. In the truck bed behind him, the grizzly bear lay motionless. Daniel glanced in the rear-view mirror, his stomach twisting at the sight. The bear's massive chest still rose and fell, but slowly, too slowly. Stay with me. He pressed the gas pedal harder, his truck bouncing violently over the rugged terrain. The nearest wildlife rescue station was over 10 miles away. Would the bear make it? Would he make it? Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. He had no idea, but he wasn't going to stop. The moment Daniel pulled up, rangers and veterinarians rushed forward. A man in a green uniform, Dr. Mason Carter, head of the facility, ran to Daniel's truck, his eyes widening when he saw what was in the bed. "Jesus, Daniel," Mason muttered. "What the hell happened?" Daniel didn't have time for explanations. He's been caught in barbed wire for hours. He's weak, dehydrated. He fought off cougars. You need to help him now. Mason didn't ask any more questions. The team moved fast, sedating the bear just enough to keep it calm as they hoisted its enormous body onto a stretcher. Daniel followed closely, his boots pounding against the concrete floor as they brought the Grizzly into the treatment center. The next hour was a blur, blood, needles, sutures, clean bandages. Daniel paced outside the exam room, exhausted, filthy, and covered in sweat. But he never took his eyes off the door. He had done everything he could. Now it was up to them. Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in a chair outside the wildlife center, staring at the dark sky, waiting. Every now and then, a pained whimper echoed from inside. It made Daniel's chest tighten every time. At some point, Mason stepped out, wiping his hands on his scrubs. Daniel stood immediately. "How is he?" Mason sighed. "It's bad, Daniel." But he glanced through the window. "He's a fighter." Daniel swallowed hard. Yeah, he was. The bear should have died out there in the woods, should have been ripped apart by the cougars, should have bled out in the truck. But he didn't, because somewhere along the way, in the most impossible way, the bear had decided to trust him. Daniel let out a breath, nodding. "Let me know when he wakes up," he muttered. Mason gave him a knowing look. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" Daniel smirked weakly. "Not a chance." Sunlight poured through the trees. Daniel had barely closed his eyes, but as soon as the first light of dawn hit, he was on his feet. He walked into the recovery area, his heart hammering as he approached the stall where they had kept the bear overnight. And then he stopped. The Grizzly was awake, sitting up, still weak, but alive. Daniel exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. The bear's eyes met his. A deep, silent recognition passed between them. Daniel stepped closer, gripping the metal railing. The bear didn't flinch, didn't growl. It just watched him. And then something unbelievable happened. The Grizzly huffed softly, tilting its head just slightly. It was the same motion Daniel had seen the first time they locked eyes in the woods, the same look of trust. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be so damn attached, but he was. He had saved this bear, and in some way, this bear had saved him too. Mason stepped beside him. "He's going to be okay," he said. "We'll monitor him for a while, then move him to a protected zone." Daniel nodded slowly. He should have felt relieved, but instead he felt something else, an ache deep in his chest. He had spent his entire life believing that bears don't trust humans, that wild animals don't form bonds. But looking at the grizzly now, he wasn't so sure anymore. He took a deep breath and tapped the railing lightly. "Take care, big guy," he murmured. The grizzly didn't move, but as Daniel turned to walk away, he heard it, a deep, low chuffing sound. A goodbye. Daniel paused. Then he smiled, and without another word, he walked into the morning light. Forever changed. Some connections can't be explained. Some bonds go beyond what we think we know. This isn't just a story about a man saving a bear. It's a story about trust, about resilience, and about the moments in life that change us forever. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who loves inspiring stories. Because sometimes the most powerful connections happen in the most unexpected,